and thanks everyone for joining today and giving us a chance to give you an update on what we've been doing with ArchiveGrid. We have a chance to go through a quick tour of the system and get some background on some other projects we've been doing that are related to ArchiveGrid. But initially, I wanted to get a chance for you all to see the team. It's a small team. It's an all-and-mighty team. It's me, it's Ellen, Merrilee, and recently we were working with a doctoral student from the University of Amsterdam. So, I'm Bruce Washburn. I'm a software engineer. I've been working with this data in one way or another since the 90s when I worked at RLG, and we developed a system called Archival Resources, so I know it really well, and it's a lot of fun to work with, and this past few months have been particularly interesting, and we'll get into that a little later. I mentioned Mark. He worked with us in February, March, and April, and was critically important for our work in extending into some new investigations into how we could make connections between collections in ArchiveGrid. I'll talk about it in some detail. I wish Mark could be here, but it's a little late in Amsterdam. Over to Merrilee. She can introduce herself.
Hi, Merrilee Proffitt here in San Mateo, California. On the ArchiveGrid team, I'm kind of the archivist-facing member of the team, the person probably with the most experience working in archives and with archivists. Role in the webinar today is going to be mostly to monitor the chat stream. So if you have questions or comments, send them along to all attendees, or all of these is more fun. And I'll also be monitoring Twitter. So if you've got things on the ArchiveGrid hashtag, I'll be looking out for those as well.
And I'll let Ellen introduce herself and take the presentation from there. But we should note that we confer and consult often with our other members of the OCLC Research team, in particular Jen Schaffner and Jackie Dooley. So Ellen, I think you might need to unmute, but after that, it's over to you.
As Bruce mentioned, my name is Ellen Eckert. I'm a research assistant with OCLC. I started with OCLC about 3.5 years ago as an intern, and I rolled over to the staff years ago. And my work has primarily been with ArchiveGrid. I mostly work with contributors, and I work with individuals working at institutions to try to get their collection descriptions represented in ArchiveGrid. I also just consult with the team twice a week during our meetings, and I help out with anything I can help out with when it's grid related. And I work out of my home office in Portland, Oregon, so any ambient noise you hear during my portion of the presentation will be from her. So for briefly the structure of our webinar today, I'm going to go over our mission, and I'm going to talk a little bit about archive users and how they use our system. I'm going to give you a brief tour of the system, and I'm going to hand over the presentation back to Bruce. He's going to talk about how we promote ArchiveGrid, how your collections or how anybody's collections can be included, and he's going to give more detail about recent research we've been doing. So the question right off the bat is, what is ArchiveGrid? ArchiveGrid, as you can see, is a discovery system used by researchers and scholars to locate primary source materials in archives. How do we know when ArchiveGrid is working? Well, we know it's working well when it identifies a collection that a researcher did not know existed. Perhaps in an archival institution you would not have expected. And we also know ArchiveGrid is working when we are able to provide a contact point for the researcher to contact an archives for more help, so they get access to the materials that they learned about in ArchiveGrid. Basically, visually represented here, our ArchiveGrid's mission is to connect researchers to primary source materials. Who is ArchiveGrid? Based on previous user studies we've done, we've identified 4 major user groups of our system. Faculty, going left to right on the slide here, faculty, research such as students of in a college or a university. Independent scholars can also include faculty who are maybe doing research during their own time and are not identifying themselves as a faculty when they're doing research in that other role. And genealogists. Also should note that we did a survey last year of archives and special collections researchers and learned more about these 4 user groups and how they search for primary source materials. What does ArchiveGrid include? ArchiveGrid includes descriptions of nearly 2 million archival collections housed in thousands of archives and libraries, primarily in the United States, but we do have some collections from institutions outside of the United States as well. This can be provided as MARC records through OCLC's WorldCat, or harvested directly from contributor websites, and we harvest file aids in EAD XML, HTML, PDF, or Word formats. Because not all the archival collection descriptions available to us are in a single resource already, we basically draw them from multiple sources and in multiple formats to build our own separate aggregated ArchiveGrid index. So as you can see, the WorldCat MARC records, EAD XML finding aids, the HTML finding aids, and then the PDF and other finding aids, as I said earlier, in Word format, all come together under this ArchiveGrid umbrella. And this slide is to emphasize that most of the archival descriptions are indexed in a single aggregation already, and that's WorldCat. But the separate ArchiveGrid index that we maintain helps in 2 ways. It allows the aggregation to extend to aids that are not yet contributed to WorldCat, and it also filters WorldCat to include just the descriptions that fit our requirements. So you can see MARC recs from WorldCat make up about 90% of our index, while smaller percentages of other finding aids make up the rest of it. And most ArchiveGrid contributing institutions are in the United States. We aren't limiting the aggregation to the United States, but other regions have well-established regional or national aggregations that may benefit from being replicated in ArchiveGrid. Here, we are showing that the growth of ArchiveGrid has been significant over the past year. We see a dip in March of 2012, and this is because we tuned our selection algorithm for WorldCat MARC records to exclude some of the descriptions that were not for archival materials necessarily. Word documents also represented a minor component for a few months in 2012, but we didn't have any active contributors of Word documents at the time. All we do except format. So again, you can see the list of MARC records from WorldCat in ArchiveGrid. And then finding aids in ED, HTML, and to a smaller extent PDF, again, make up about 10% of the entire aggregation. And now I'm going to start a quick tour of ArchiveGrid. I'm showing you the URL here in case you're able to access the system from where you're at. And I wanted to note the term beta in the host name. Don't worry about it too much. ArchiveGrid is using this host name for now, in part because we want to differentiate this OCLC research system from other OCLC production services. But we think that perhaps over time the host name will change to avoid the beta test implication. This is the homepage. Here's a screenshot of our homepage. We expect this page to be seen by users who are referred to the site by a link on a partner or a contributor site. So we want to provide a variety of ways for these users to get a sense of what's inside and to find nearby archives and to browse topics or to start a search. As you can see in the upper right-hand corner is our main search box where people initiate a search system. And then in the center of our page is a map, and the little red pins, all the contributors of collections to ArchiveGrid are located on the map and identified with these red pins. And in this list, below is our contributors divided up by state. So the advantage is that you can click on either a red pin or you can click on the name of the contributor from the list and get taken directly to their collections in ArchiveGrid, or you can get directly to their website through a contact information link. And then going into, I'm going to pretend that we're doing a sample search for Golden Gate Bridge photographs. This is what a basic search results page looks like. It includes the title and the creator name for a collection. It also includes the name of the contributing institution, a set of keywords in context, a content note if a scope content note is provided in the description, and links to contact information or either a catalog record for MARC sources or the finding aid on the contributor's website. And we've all been able to recently include physical descriptions or extended data that are drawn from EAD XML finding aids. This is of a catalog record that's based on a MARC record from WorldCat. You can show more information about the collection within ArchiveGrid, along with a prominent link to contact an archivist information. Here is a sample of another component of our search results list, which is the result overview. This provides an overview of the search results showing names of people, groups, and places found in the results set. It also shows subject headings and the names and locations of the institutions where the sections are held. This is a useful way to quickly narrow a large result. This is something of a work in progress, and this is because we cannot yet really and consistently extract names and subjects from HTML and PDF finding aids. And for EAD, the tagging isn't consistent across all documents. So those description formats may be underrepresented until we improve our named entity recognition and extraction process. So result or a catalog record, there's always a prominent link to contact information. Very little of the content described in ArchiveGrid has been digitized, and access to the physical materials is often required to complete the research process. And this is emphasized by what we know from previous research studies indicating that people will get their hands on stuff as quick and as easily as possible, and we make that possible in ArchiveGrid to the best of our abilities. We learned in earlier user studies that at the very least, a working link to the contributor's website for more information on access to the collection would be expected and necessary. And we also maintain links in ArchiveGrid for each of the contributors to facilitate this next step. And also, when a collection description in ArchiveGrid is based on a finding aid from a contributor's website, we provide a link back to that finding aid rather than attempting to show the finding aid within ArchiveGrid itself. To talk about a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about our companion blog, which is another way to talk about our archival collections. In 2012, we launched the blog, and I was put in charge of editing the blog to help promote news and events related to archives and also to make connections between the news and ArchiveGrid's collections. I here describe the work that we're doing behind the scenes and to build support for ArchiveGrid. This is really another way that we can help promote archival collections using words maybe not found in collection descriptions. So, for example, in this Google search for archives unaffiliated scholars, we're taken to a link to the ArchiveGrid blog where I had a post up about something that we learned from our user studies that we did last year about unaffiliated scholars. In the post, I referenced some collections that come in ArchiveGrid, so that links to a more catalog description in Archive, and that takes the user to the source of that collection. And always seeking opportunities to promote ArchiveGrid at conferences and other events. So, for example, we've demonstrated at SA conferences in 2011 and in 2012, and we will demonstrate again in 2013. And we've also presented at and that's Society of California Archivists last year, and during when us gives presentations at conferences, we also try to mention ArchiveGrid as much as possible. I'm going to hand the presentation over to Bruce Washburn, and he's going to lead you through the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen, for the tour and for the update. The next step that I'd like to take is to give a little bit more background on how we make this information discoverable on the web. How do we reach users? What evidence do we have that we're being reached? Where do people come from? And some other background. And then I'll switch gears one more time, and we'll talk about research work that we're doing related to ArchiveGrid. About 80% of the traffic that we see coming in from search engines, and that really was the design of this system. We are having some success in getting this content out and easily discoverable on the web, and the breakdown, the sort of 80-20 rule breakdown of traffic suggests that we're headed in the right direction. Here's a, excuse me, take control here. Here's a view of where people have been coming from, the unique visits that we've seen. And you see a big jump in March and April 2012. That's actually when we began promoting the site to search engines. It was very hard to find before that. And there have been some occasional spikes. There's one in August of 2012. I think that's related to the SAA exhibits. But generally, it's been a lightly used site, about 1,000 visits a day when it's peaking. And it seems in recent weeks to be increasing as we try to continue to improve the search engine optimization and make the content more relevant. Here's an example of how people actually get in through search engines. The analytics show the common searches that lead people to ArchiveGrid. Here's a Google search in this long list of search terms. There's one name that gets searched for a fair amount, where the links show, the results show a link to ArchiveGrid. This is what it looks like in a Google search result. The third link in the result is to ArchiveGrid, and if you follow that link, you land on the catalog record page representing this collection, describing this collection, with a link to the contributor site. And since most of the traffic in ArchiveGrid is coming from search engines, this is in effect the home page for those visitors. So here where we're starting to spend a lot more time and thinking about how to improve the experience on this page to get them here to something else. Now, a responsive site is going to matter to some users of mobile devices and tablets, and that's an significantly increasing percentage of our users. So last year was about 8% of users came in with mobile devices or tablets. It's about 13%. So we last year switched to a responsive design. So in this way, the interface adapts to what kind of device capabilities are available when someone connects. So just the top of the list of the many, many different kinds of mobile and tablet devices that are connecting these days. If you're wondering how to get your collections included, if you have marked cataloging records and they've been contributed to WorldCat, they might already be in ArchiveGrid, but you should let us know if they aren't. It could be that we have missing the filter or just hadn't set up your site as an ArchiveGrid contributor, and it's an easy thing for us to get started if that's the case. If you have finding aids on your website, as Ellen mentioned, in HTML, PDF, or Word, we can collect those if they're not otherwise being described in WorldCat already with our web harvester and get them into ArchiveGrid that way. And the way to tell us that is to fill out this simple form. You can see in links on the web page, the Include Your Collections link at the top and bottom of the page will take you to this form. Fill it out quickly, and we'll get back in touch with you with more details about how to get started. The ArchiveGrid index gets updated about every 6 weeks, and get a fresh extraction of the marked archival collection records that we include from WorldCat, and we also completely reharvest all the finding aids that we have from our contributor websites. Now that's needed because there isn't any other way to assure ourselves that we've accounted for all the new finding aids, updated content, and deleted finding aids or collection records. It takes us through the background, really what ArchiveGrid is, how it works, maintain it, who's using it. But that's really one part of OCLC Research's interest. Part we do in OCLC Research is evaluate how people think about and use information, and how data structures are utilized by those who create and distribute metadata. And I want to talk briefly about two recent examples of that work. One is a survey, special collections use. Ellen mentioned this previously. And the other is a tag analysis study for EAD documents. We studied last year around this time. Since our work is guided by what we understand about collections, we're aggregating how they're used. We conducted our own in-depth user studies and usability studies several years ago by ArchiveGrid, and have carried out this kind of work as well. So we look at research and try to understand what we can, how it applies to ArchiveGrid, to refresh our understanding of all this on our perspective, and how special collections are used, how people can research resources, how they share them, and what they value. The survey conducted last year, we did get decided to get our refreshed perspective on how people are using special collections. And the survey results confirm some earlier findings about the audiences ArchiveGrid can serve and how they conduct research. It also helped inform our perspective on the role social media can play within ArchiveGrid itself. And as part of the context of research, this is something that had not been on the radar when we studied users back in 2005 and 6. And you can learn more about the study in a blog post from Ellen. There's a link to it, or if you go to the blog and search for the Special Collections Survey. There's also going to be a paper that Merrilee and Ellen are conspiring on almost as we speak, as I speak. That'll be coming soon as well. The tag analysis is something we did more recently when Mark Braun was here working with us over the past few months. We did the aggregation of our ArchiveGrid about 130,000 EAD finding aids from lots of different sources. And it's a heterogeneous mix, so you'd expect tag usage to vary pretty widely. But we have really taken this close a look at it to see how it varies and what that means to us. So given that variation, and when we think about a discovery system or consider how to rate and compare multiple documents, we wondered what are the thresholds that should be used to determine whether the data supports indexing, sorting, browsing, and other types of functionality. So a paper is being written principally by Mark and Merrilee to evaluate the results of this and report those findings. And it considers the following questions. What constitutes enough in element usage so that it supports certain types of functionality, and to what extent does the content of elements lend itself to those types? As I mentioned earlier by Ellen of extent data showing up in search results. It's a great presentation, but could you make something out of that for sorting? It's that kind of question that will be considered in this paper that's expected to be submitted for publication in the Code for Literature Journal fairly soon. But it also plays a research sandbox role in research. I'm going to explore one example of that in some detail. It'll take 10 minutes or so to go through this narrative so you can get a sense of how we conduct our work, what counts as research from our perspective, and how it relates to ArchiveGrid, and end with in that narrative with some questions, because it's an ongoing study. So as part of the tag analysis, we also did some work with named entity recognition. Ellen mentioned that might have some potential down the road for extracting named entities out of unstructured text or HTML or PDF text to find names of people, places, and groups, and so forth. So we're exploring that, and it has to an unexpected opportunity to explore collaborative search and gamification. And that's mostly what I'll be talking about in the next few slides. This is about browsing in ArchiveGrid. In an earlier slide, you saw someone searching in Google, finding a search result, linking to us, and landing on a collection description page. That's linking there by itself. You could create links on that page from named entities to other documents, the names of the people described in subject headings, for example. Those are kind of expected on the web, conventional Wikipedia-style links. You could also create links between documents. The subject headings, they can provide a nice way of clustering similar documents, but the broader and narrower categories might not be supported, those kind of expectations of browsing up and down through the list. And subject headings might not be universally applied across the set. Link between entities, two people in correspondence with one another or family members, those relationships are, and co-occurrence of them in documents is another way to connect things and bring archival collection descriptions together. And you see a lot of recommender system links on the web. If you've bought this, also bought that. You need a lot of data to support this kind of connection, and the ArchiveGrid data at hand is relatively sparse. So in these four approaches, the one that interested us initially was the third one, which is to focus on making relationships apparent between entities. We use a named entity recognition tool that was developed by Dan Roth at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. It had been extended by Gene Godby and Devin Smith here in OCLC Research. And right out of the box, it ran quite nicely, in particular for names of people, groups, and places. When we applied to the 130,000 EAD finding aids that we had aggregated. But our task here was to annotate the relations, the connections, the correspondence, and context between entities. I need this to generate training data, gold training data for training a text analysis model. And it's really difficult, at least for us. We expected to about 1,000 annotated documents in order to help train our model for finding relations in EAD documents. And between our little team trying to do this, it was a tremendous amount of time and effort to assemble that. We didn't have the time and resources, or more importantly, subject expertise, to build a sufficient store of reliable training data. So we went back to the second option, clustering, which we've seen before. We've seen categories and classifications applied to data to try to bring things together, cluster around related categories and classifications. It's problematic to do this if the documents are not the same thing, but it's especially hard when the descriptions are highly variable. So we needed, for this clustering model that we were going to try to build and apply to this aggregation, we needed ground truth data in order to train that model to effectively test the clustering that it was doing. So we considered some ways to assemble that ground truth data for clustering. We started with the notion, well, this was my idea, so it didn't work very well. We tried to find descriptions of online exhibits where archival collections had been part of the basis of putting the exhibit together, and it would connect collections to those topics. So sort of a cute idea, but it wasn't very reliable. The second approach that we took was just to use a range of different clustering models and pool the results and judge them for relevance, and then keep refining the models. But that approach is really biased to the annotators and the model and the sample. And the approach that really intrigued us was, could we develop some sort of a tool or an environment in which we could crowdsource the step of identifying key collections about it and use that to create our ground truth data for clustering. So we used a whiteboard in the building, Mark and I, at one point in time, and went through lots of different designs and did a fair amount of background research on kinds of systems that successfully do this work. How could we build this application that would direct expert views on archival collection descriptions related to a topic? And missing in this exploration of ours, we were getting some really intriguing ideas about how we might build that environment. But we had about who would use it. Would it be researchers who spend time in archives and know those collections well? Archivists, perhaps, and librarians who are knowledgeable about their own collections, not necessarily knowledgeable about others? And what kinds of mechanisms could we use to get people to collaborate? What's their motivation? There are examples of this work happening in the world around us. This is one, the website, searchteam.com. It's a working example of what's called collaborative search. So imagine you're thinking you're going to buy a new camera, and you could on your own look on the web and find recommendations from various sources, but in a collaborative search system like this one, you could work with people you know, friends and colleagues and invited experts, and combine your search results in folders and get them organized, compared. You could discuss results, and you produce through this process an organized or persistent result for your team and maybe for others to use. So that's a pretty powerful combination, a group effort, a team-oriented approach to coming up with a list of things out of the haystack. And that nicely translates to our scenario. You might know who the experts are on your topic. You might be one, but you don't necessarily know who all the others are. And you might not be expert on everything. So the motivation is still a challenge in an environment like this. What would come on to an environment that we create that would bring in these experts where they could be found and could lend their expertise? Sources of inspiration, which is a crowdsourced project funding website. Fold is an application, a web game for team-style protein folding puzzles. Stack Overflow, which I use every day and completely depend on now, is a place where technical questions are answered by a community of experts. Those experts get experience points and badges and all sorts of things for their participation. The National Library of Australia's Trove newspaper OCR text corrections site is another good example where people, not just the expertise of being able to read and correct typographic errors, but the subject expertise about what those things are about so they can tell what the correction is. And similarly, in some ways, the old weather, which I found out about, and I think it's great, transcribing ship's logs to help cover mid-19th century weather observations. That's going to help improve climate model projections. So these are thriving clusters of activity around a topic with subject experts where you can experience points in a game-like way. They're fun, engaging, and fulfilling games, and they build something useful. They build something that can't be built by just one person, and that continues to inspire us to imagine a collaborative solution to this problem we have, trying to develop an environment in which these collections related to topics could be identified. It's a zero-sum game, and great examples of solving problems that one person can't solve on their own. We thought of game design, and we were influenced pretty heavily by Amy Jo Kim and her work, recent publications, and thinking about non-zero-sum games. We applied, in this case, her outline for designing the player journey to help clarify our thinking. So we're building a collaborative search game for archival collections, and we're building it so that we can get recommendations for collections. We're building it for archivists and researchers, students, teachers, hobbyists, our audience. The key bit is to make collections discoverable, and what's fun about that? You're helping others, you get reputation, advancement, just the accomplishment of putting those connections together. And we thought initially the place would be the people who are actually working with the collections. Archivists, librarians, people who create the finding aids and who manage the materials, because they know or they could find out what's in a collection, even if the information is not in finding aid or the collection description. They know the collection's best. They have an ongoing practice of helping people find relevant collections, and that fits into the flow we were thinking of a game we called Topic Web after trying other names out. We settled on that for our collaborative search game, and basic actions in this game would be to choose a topic that you care about. You use the topic game to suggest collections that are related to it. You order collections based on how central they are to the topic. You can add notes about the collections if there's something that you know about it that isn't accounted for in the collection description. You can invite your colleagues to help create the web. So you don't work on this individually, you work on it collectively and collaborate. Now, on their own, those basic actions are just atomic, and they don't sound like much fun. So I wanted to think again, what makes this a game? What is a game? It's a journey, and reference referencing Amy Jo Kim's work on designing the player journey, we wanted to build a capacity for people to get in quickly and do something productive, but then to get better to the expert or master level. And we thought about ways in which you might do that, getting points and badges for the actions that you take, and getting a sense of accomplishment as a topic web is finished and published in some way, rotation enhancement as people view it and like it and use it, and that there will be questions that people have about what others say about their collections and how they relate to a topic. Also, there are things that could enter into the flow as that journey continues. And these need to balance skill and challenge. So it can't be too intimidating, difficult, or time-consuming to begin with, but it can't stay that way, or else it gets really boring. So that's another thing we were thinking about in designing this experience. We want to keep it interesting. And so for another, you might build a topic web from collections in your own institution and look at other people's topic webs and like them, and maybe colleagues. The expert might start to collaborate with others to build cross-archival topic webs and suggest collections from your archive that someone might have missed in their topic web. At the mentor level, perhaps discovering and creating new, explored, rare topics, influencing what gets published, customizing the look and feel of published topic webs. These are ideas at this point. We're going to develop these further, but we're trying to stay aware of the theory behind this process and make sure that we stay in the flow as the game develops. So we developed this game to some extent. We had a version of it that we demonstrated at the Society of California Archivists meeting in April and had people sit down and use it and got great feedback there. When Mark and I demonstrated it, we went in thinking we were about 80% done, and we left realizing we were about 20% done. And that's always great to hear at this stage, this formative stage. So the slides that I'm going to show give you a sense of what we've built so far, but it's, again, still in a very formative stage. You start a top web just by taking a couple quick steps. You give it a title, you give a brief description, start it. And just by doing that, you're in the game. You're at the level, you're in the getting started mission, and you've succeeded in its first step, and that's to have created the new topic web. But at that point, the web doesn't exist so much. It has a title and description, but it doesn't have any suggested collections. So that's the next step to take. And in the topic web game, what we've done is build a little side panel where there's a search result from ArchiveGrid that shows collections related to the word and the title of my collection. I can change that search in the game to anything, but we start with prompted search based on the topic web title. And if I want to add something, I can suggest it. So here's a snip of that search result. This is a collection that looks like it's relevant. If I hit the suggested button, that's a card to my suggested collections deck, and my suggested count goes to 1. So you start to feel like you're participating and getting feedback in a game-like environment. And after adding 5 collections, that's another step in the mission of getting started. There are some other ones that are being prompted here that I can tell to add descriptions or order the collections based on relevance. One way to set that relevance is to just select a button. This one's mostly relevant, I declare, for my topic, and I hit the button, and it's quickly ordered. So you could say more about it in the description as well, or note things that are of interest, or perhaps point out something that would otherwise be hard to locate in a very large collection, noting what box or folder holds the things that are relevant. That commentary gets added in the game alongside the collection description and could prove to be useful for someone else looking for this material. So here's the game. I've completed more or less the mission. I added and ordered and described 5 collections. And here I could invite others to play or try to get something back from the game, like just a list of related collections. At this point, in this example, I've contributed knowledge to ArchiveGrid for recommending these related collections, and also assembled some ground truth data that could help train and test our clustering model. These things are all really useful, and they're quick built in the game, but they eluded us otherwise for years. So we're quite intrigued by this even in this early stage, what this game might potentially do for us and for discovery in a system like ArchiveGrid and elsewhere. Here's an example of a more fully used game or played game where more sections have been added by more people and there's more order. This visualization that Mark developed in the game is big, I think, although at first I take a little getting used to. It packs a lot of information into a very concise form. The circle at the center is basically your topic. Historic of San Mateo, California is our topic, and the other circles represent collections that have been added. The divides within them indicate how many people have commented or looked at them, at those collection descriptions, and ordered or reviewed them. And distance from the center suggests how closely they're related to the topic. So if you wanted to see the 3 collections that are most closely related, it's easy to see them in this visualization. And for a topic web with dozens of collections, that might be a really effective display. The component of this that makes it game-like is, of course, to have a leaderboard. And if I hadn't had to go back to Amsterdam at the end of April, I'm sure he'd be in first place. But unfortunately, I have lead for this particular game. That kind of feedback, I think, will also be important, but it's an important question for us to see whether these gamification components are useful. Do they get away? The form stage questions that we want to get answers to. So we talked about what you do when you complete a game, and how do you actually know when you're done? What counts as being done in the game? So it's a zero-sum game. There isn't like someone who wins it, but the group, the team working on developing a topic web could decide that they've covered the ground. They've actually found most of what they're looking for, and made all the connections and ordering that they want to do. They might want to get a list of those collections in the topic web for use elsewhere. So, for example, download it into something that you could put in a spreadsheet, maybe embed in some other website or discovery system. You might want to publish the topic web as a document in ArchiveGrid, and that's something we've been exploring, thinking about how that might work. Annotate it with other images and text from other contexts to give it more of an information object. And, excuse me, got a reminder for another meeting, so I'll have to hurry up here. And see recommended collections in ArchiveGrid, and this is something that I want to do right away, as soon as collections get added, because this goes back to our initial questions of how to make it easy to browse, discover, and connect related collections in ArchiveGrid, which it's not been particularly good at or adept at before. Even relevance ranking could benefit from these kinds of connections. That these all start to get more, if they're somewhere in the search result and we found someone said they were related, they should be nearer to the top of the result or closely associated with the top. The next steps. We are planning a focus group in early June, and that's to evaluate this basic idea with some archival community experts to give us guidance on which direction to take. The results study is to test our assumptions and see how topic web fits in a social context for the people who would play it. And based on the results of that study, we'll determine how to proceed. So again, an example of what research looks like at this stage. It's not complete. We don't really have an idea yet about how this will move forward. It's still very intriguing and interesting to us. We've learned a lot about gamification and collaborative search along the way. And some of those results, at the very least, could be published and made more widely available. So that takes you through this exploration of this one area of research related to ArchiveGrid. And we like the arrow. This kind of tells our story in a very full way, going all the way back to the late 90s when in the Research Libraries group, where we started by building a discovery system just to prove EAD's ability to work as in an aggregate form. And in later years, it became an aggregated system, including MARC records. We made it freely available a couple of years ago in OCLC Research. It started to extend to responsive design and other components, trying to improve and extend discovery and access through search engines. And really, in recent months, in particular, as Mark was working with us, had the ability to pursue more deeply the data analysis work that we always had intended to do, learn from that and publish those findings, and investigate some areas where we might be able to make a difference. Go beyond the expected conventional keyword searching with assets kind of discovery system and build something that really engages and adds new knowledge. And you can imagine how interesting that would be to do. So thanks for listening. I know there have been some questions, and I wasn't stopping my spiel to answer them, but Merrilee's been following the chat line and responding individually. Are there any questions, Merrilee, we should take?
So one of the things I thought we might take up is there was an exchange with the Yale Music Library on Twitter. Hi, Yale Music Library. And the question was about relevance ranking and how can we improve relevance ranking. So, for example, if you search on Vladimir Horowitz, the collection at Yale turns up at number 7, which doesn't make sense because it's the main repository for Horowitz material. I think that what we've been outlining with Topic Web is a way to try to establish a place where people to be able to better deal with relevancy ranking, which is a challenge. When all you have is the words, you don't have something like holdings to do weighting. So you can only go by the number of appearances of the word Vladimir Horowitz, for example.
You can try to give weight to certain fields where those words have appeared. That hasn't been, from our experimentations and testing anyway, the ultimate solution to this problem. It has helped for some cases, and it's made other cases worse in terms of ranking. And there isn't much else in the description that kind of sets the flag as I'm important. Rank me high. There isn't page rank. There isn't something like that that comes with the collection description. So it has been an ongoing question and struggle for us to improve that ranking. The other area we mentioned earlier was extent. We're just taking a closer look at extent data, and to the extent that that this collection is an input into relevance. It's been completely ignored in our index up until now, and it's notoriously hard to analyze into something sortable. But that's just the kind of challenge that the ArchiveGrid team likes to take on. So we've actually been doing some exploration of that just in recent weeks. We'll turn into something that improves results, I can't say, obviously, but it's a strong interest of ours to improve relevance ranking.
Yeah. There's another question about an API for ArchiveGrid. I said what I think is true on chat, which is that we're not planning on creating an API for ArchiveGrid that we'd like for people to. So much of the aggregation is from WorldCat. We think it makes sense to point people at the existing WorldCat APIs.
Yeah, I think that's the right kind of answer for now. But I honestly, I'm still somewhat conflicted because there is an API in the Topic Web game, that search panel that's there that uses in effect an API, sends a search term just as you would in the discovery system, but it gets back a machine readable from the result and decides how it wants to show it. Make that more widely available or not has been an ongoing question, and part of it is because we have OCLC has a service for this called the WorldCat Search API, where you can send searches and get results back in machine readable form. It has service levels associated with it too. If you were going to depend on this result, you perhaps would want that as one aspect of your use of the system. It's not ideal in some ways though, because the searches are across all of WorldCat, and it's not so easy to filter it down to just the archival collection. Yeah,
and the follow-on comment that the ability to limit to the ArchiveGrid segment, both in the public OCLC WorldCat interface and also in an API, would be a huge value-add feature.
Oh, yeah.
So to segment WorldCat and make those segments available through the API.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, that was our understanding of the direction we were headed when we made the decision to take on support for ArchiveGrid and OCLC Research back in 2011. Part of our understanding about that transition was that over time, the WorldCat search API would place where our discovery system would begin. We'd be the layer on top of that, the user interface to it. But we'd rely solely on the WorldCat search API. We wouldn't build our own index aggregation. And we have that API capability yet. Can't say when we will, but it's a direction for us. It hasn't as quickly as any of us would have liked.
Oh boy, questions are coming fast and furious. A lot about contribution here. So here's a great question. Are there simple ways I can format my PDF finding aids so that you can ingest them more easily? I started as an archivist at a small historical society that hasn't had an archivist or digitized finding aids before, so I have the flexibility to format them in a way that would fit multiple needs, including yours. And I think that probably has less to do with how you format your PDF finding aids and probably a little more with how you store them on your file system.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, we want to be able to find the links to the finding aids, just the PDF documents, and sometimes we'll be given a page to harvest from where there's a mix of files. Some are finding aids and some are something else. So get the harvester to find just the PDF files. That's one discussion. The other one, though, it's a good question about formatting for discovery and ingest. To have the opportunity to do this from you're in the process, look at the document properties of a PDF file and think about populating the fields, the properties fields, with things that other people can use. It's all metadata. It's part of the record, and it's semantically tagged in a way that the free text inside the PDF is not. So you could put something that looks like a scope and content note into a description field, have a good title in the title field. Really help in ArchiveGrid. Send an email if there are other questions, or if you want to test what it looks like from our side. But we'd be here to look at that more closely.
Yep. More questions about contributions. Our finding aids have just recently gone into grid, and when I worked on our institution, I found some results in the overview that don't seem to be ours, pulled from WorldCat. Can that be fixed? Probably need to see some more the specifics to be able to.
I'm sorry, could you restate that?
Sure. I found some results in the overview that don't seem to be ours that are pulled from WorldCat.
Yeah.
So MARC records that are not actually associated with their institution.
Their markers say they are?
It says they're pulled from WorldCat.
Well, I guess I'm just being against now, but I'm wondering if it's the case where there are times there are archival collections that were logged and they're in WorldCat and they look like they're labeled as if they're from your institution, but they're actually cataloged by the Library of Congress NUCMUC project, and those are really hard for us to pull apart and separate out of the whole. We can basically we're just showing whatever is in the 852 field or whatever the location name is. It's that situation. It's kind of a thorny one. It's been in the kind of our problem for us. But we follow up and take a closer look after the meeting.
Yeah, and you can always email us at the contact link or just send an email directly to Ellen. She shared her email address in the chat, and we try to sort things out, and more specifics are always been good. And we have a question from the Smithsonian Archives of American Art. Is harvesting of XML files impacted by robots.txt?
Is it impacted by it?
If you have a robots.txt file that says no, then I think the answer would be probably no, because we're not using a web harvesting tool.
Yeah, it's a web crawler that we're using. It's sort of optimized and customized for ArchiveGrid, where its general application is someone has given us a page that has a list of the links they want us to pick up. So in that scenario, we tend not to use robots.txt as a guide, because we've explicitly told this is the page to go to.
Right.
So it won't take into account the robots.txt file in its present form.
Right.
A related question might be, I'll ask it, site maps. we like site maps, but we don't, no one ever gives us any. So that's another way to think about making finding aids harvestable to us.
Right. So, Archives, Arc, and Art, if you've got stuff you don't want us to harvest, be sure we know about it.
Yes, yes, please do. Yeah, we'll try to adapt quickly too. If there's something that's showing up that we picked up inadvertently, we definitely want that taken care of.
So, let's see. Are there other questions on Twitter? Yes, noticing problems with records harvested from WorldCat that state many of our collections are in a different division.
Okay, and if we get the specifics on that, we'll see what we can do to correct it. One of the issues we can have sometimes with the records in WorldCat is that they're cataloged under a general OCLC symbol for the entire institution, and so we try to relate that as best we can to an institution name in ArchiveGrid, but if we've gotten that wrong, and we have in the past, we'll do it to correct it.
Yeah. People are clearly going to ArchiveGrid and doing searches and noticing stuff. People are noticing that finding aids that they only just recently added have been included in this most recent harvest, so we just reharvested and updated the index, so yes. So there's good stuff, kind of appreciative comments as well as kind of product ones. Also, there was some kind of, I'm not sure if I'm getting the gist of this, but about NUCMUC, and so NUCMUC started cataloging MARC records in ARN in the mid-1980s. All of these are supposed to be in OCLC now, and later on, I think all NUCMUC records in OCLC are in ArchiveGrid. To my knowledge, we have all NUCMUC records in WorldCat.
Yeah, we do. Well, we apply the same filter to the catalog in OCLC's WorldCat database from that source, NUCMUC, as we do everyone else. So if there was a record that came through that was represent published material for some reason, it somehow doesn't pass through our filter, then it wouldn't be in ArchiveGrid. So we have to, if there's a question about that, about constant coverage, specific examples would help track it down.
Yeah. We have one question about DPLA, and then I think we'll wrap it up here. So there was a question about DPLA. Are we working with DPLA? To which I replied, OCLC is working with DPLA, but my understanding is that their interest is in having access to digitized material. And then the question is, may be enabled to harvest records from ArchiveGrid that do have links to digital resources. And again, I think we'd say that that 90% of what's in ArchiveGrid is world data. And
yeah, it's a great question, and it's a reasonable expectation. I think it gets answered by people who would manage the data on the WorldCat side, because and just my participating in the process, but as the first slide in this presentation showed, there aren't many of us. Merrilee and I don't spend all our time in ArchiveGrid. It's actually
a small percentage of our time.
And Ellen, so between the three of us, so we do what we tend to keep pace with things. So whenever we see an opportunity to address a need or identify the need and get it addressed by an existing service on the OCLC product side of the house, that's generally the direction we go. This way we avoid duplicative effort on one hand, and we can use our time for other things that are more focused on ArchiveGrid and research.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of questions that are still coming in, but it's time to wrap up. We will send around a transcript of the chat and try to get to answering some of the questions that we weren't able to answer online. But thanks to all of you for giving really great quesess to go with. It's always more interesting than kind of sitting around staring at each other.
Yes, definitely. Yeah,
interviewing each other.
Yeah, it was a great hour for us. I'm very appreciative of you all spending time with us and letting us tell our story and give this update. I appreciate it very much.